Hey, what's up, students? We're going to go ahead and continue with our notes. We've got our last section, section 4 of our West Between the World notes. Today, we're going to be doing cultural and intellectual trends. So, last time we talked about the rise of Nazi Germany and Hitler, and today we're going to talk about some of the cultural stuff that was going on around the world at that same time. So, we're talking the time between World War One, World War Two. This is going to blend into a little bit of both of those as well. All right. So mass communication was a propaganda tool, as a propaganda tool, was born during World War One. So it's not that propaganda didn't exist already, but really using it as for the government to gain support for the war through things like the radio and eventually movies really jumped a lot and increased a lot during World War One. So you have all of these people in their countries that don't want to be fighting in the war. How can we convince them to continue to support our government? And that's where propaganda would come in as a useful tool. A series of inventions in the late 19th century led the way for a revolution in mass communication, especially Marconi's discovery of wireless radio waves. So this is where we'd get our radios. So the radios we still use today, that technology was being found at that time. And this would completely change the way that we are going to communicate with each other and how entertainment is going to be used, how propaganda will be used. Really changes the world. Broadcasting facilities were built in the United States, Europe, and Japan during 1921 and 1922. So this is when we start seeing, like broadcasting type towers and stuff that we still use similar technology today. In 1926, there were 2.2 million radios in Great Britain. By the end of the 1930s, there were 9 million. So we're talking a rapid growth of this technology of radios. Remember, this is before people had TVs. So if you didn't have TVs, what is it that you're doing in your leisure time? And for a lot of people, that was listening to the radio. So by the end of World War II, 60% of adults in more developed countries were attending movies once a week. Now, I'm sure you guys probably watch a lot of things every day, but to actually go and attend a movie once a week is pretty often. And for 60% of adults to be doing that, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of influence that movies have, a big part of the culture that movies get into now. And a lot of governments are going to start using that to their advantage, especially Nazi Germany. So when we start talking about World War II, or if you're doing any studying on your own, you're going to hear this name, Joseph Goebbels. Now, he was the Nazi propaganda minister. He created a special film division to support the making of films with Nazi messages. So putting out movies and uh, entertainment and media all geared towards the Nazi message, whether that was anti Semitic things or uh, Aryan superiority ideas, whatever it was, they could be pushing that out in those kinds of movies. By 1920, the 8-hour workday had become the norm for many workers. Remember, we talked about during the Industrial Revolution how we finally started getting into this idea of shift work, where you work for one shift or a certain set of time during the day, and then you would go home. And prior to electricity, that was really hard to do. People generally worked from sun up to sun down. Well, by the 1920s, we have a pretty set, regular 8-hour workday, which means you got a lot of other time during the day that you're either not sleeping or not working. And because we start getting more disposable income, we start seeing a lot of increase in leisure activities. So for you guys, that might be video games or sports. Back then, it might have been a little different, but still, the idea of having this time where you're doing stuff for fun and for entertainment increases a lot. So Nazis adapted the idea of leisure programs to help their country, to help their totalitarian control. So by giving people options of joy, the people stay content. Because the Nazis are hosting the activities, they can control the message of the concerts or the operas or the films, etc. So if it's your government, in this case, the Nazi government, is the one who's providing all of these leisure programs, these festivals, these movies, all these things for you to do, one, you're happy because you get to do all these fun activities. But two, you also are getting this message from your government that maybe your government cares for you, but also being indoctrinated or shown the perspective of the Nazis, which you're constantly seeing. So again, that could be those ideas of German superiority. So if every movie you go to, every concert you go to, and every festival you go to, and everything is supported by the Nazis, and everything you do is telling you that blonde hair, blue eyes, Aryan ancestry is superior and the best, then they're going to start believing that kind of stuff. Now, add to that the fact that you're keeping the citizens happy because they're getting a lot of activities and things to do. So during a wartime, one of the most important things is to keep your citizens happy so they will be more likely to continue to support the government and support the war. So if you're providing a lot of leisure activities, you're giving the opportunity for that. But if you aren't doing that, then it's going to be a lot harder to gain or to keep support for the government, keep support for the war. But the Nazis were very good at that. That was something they were going to really focus on, was even though their military is trying to take over Europe, they want life at home in Germany to remain as joyful as they possibly can, as normal as they possibly can. So they continue to have support from the German people. All right, there's two new kinds of art that comes in at the time. We've got the Dadaists, were artists who were obsessed with the idea that life has no purpose. So if we look, this would be down here. This would be Marcel Duchamp, or Duchamp. And this is a famous piece of art that he created called Fountain. So if you see that, some of you might recognize it. That is a urinal. So this is something that people would find in a bathroom. And you see, he took it and turned it into a piece of art by essentially just using it for what it is, flipping it in a different angle. It caused a lot of controversy at the time. People thought it was immoral. But really what he ended up doing was kind of questioning what people considered art. And so that was a whole movement in the early 1900s, early 20th century. And then we get surrealism, which sought a reality beyond the material world. You can see that through a lot of Salvador Dali's work. He's one of the most popular. You can see that over here with the melting clocks. If you've ever been in Miss Claire's art room, she's got a melting clock in her room. So those are two new art styles of the time. German art developed by the Nazis was actually derived from 19th century folk art and emphasized realistic scenes of everyday life. So if you start seeing art from the Nazis, a lot of it's going to have those elements to it. And we get stream of consciousness was a technique used by writers to report their innermost thoughts of each character. You guys have maybe done this in some writing classes where you just write whatever comes to mind. Doesn't matter what it is, just go with it. That is called stream of consciousness. Whatever's coming to your mind, you put down. And that was a more common technique at this time too. Now, scientifically, Ernest Rutherford, one of the physicists who showed that the atom could be split, called the 1920s the heroic age of physics. So some of you might know what happens when you split an atom. That's how we get our atomic energy, or could be used for an atomic bomb, which we'll talk more about when we get to World War II. But Ernest Rutherford, an incredibly famous physicist, influences at this time and talks about how important this time in science is. Newtonian physics was challenged when German physicist Werner Heisenberg explained an observation he called the uncertainty principle. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the uncertainty principle. I suggest asking your science teachers more about it. But yeah, this is kind of what's going on. We've got new art at the time. We've got important time in science. That's going to really, really influence how the transition from World War I through that time between the wars into World War II is, when we get this new technologies in World War II, which are both really important and influential, but also potentially really devastating. And we'll talk about that later. But I believe that's the last set of notes. So going forward, we are going to be studying for this test. You guys should have all of your notes filled out now. And we will talk more about that and our test and our study guide. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you soon.